Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. My name is Dr. Drum McNaughton, and I'm the CEO of The Change Leader, a management consultancy that helps university leaders create sustainable higher ed institutions through holistic approaches to strategic management, university academics and operations, change management, leadership, and governance. Our podcast brings you the latest in higher ed news, as well as some of the top experts in our profession who will share with you their perspectives on how you can grow your institution. Our guest today is Deb Maue, Vice President of Marketing for Aurora University. Deb's a marketing and branding expert for higher ed and has led successful marketing initiatives in highly complex organizations in higher ed, consumer packaged goods, and for agencies. She's a sought-after speaker and regular contributor to Inside Higher Ed's Call for Action blog and is a valued member of the Change Leader Thought Leadership team. Hi, Deb. Good to have you back on the show.
Hi, Drum. It's great to be back. Happy summer.
Oh, thank you. You're just wrapping up things at university with you're in summer session now, and things must be really quiet up there.
They're really quiet. It's very strange to walk across campus and not see any students and so few cars. So it's a nice break, but it's always nice when the students come back in the fall and you have that constant reminder of why we do what we do.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so nice, too, because the summer gives you an opportunity to step back a little bit and see what's going on and what's worked and what hasn't. So you've been doing marketing for so long. We've talked about that in the past. I think it was kind of when dirt was new, wasn't it? No,
Thank you for that.
Oh, sure. I think I've got a few years on you, but we won't talk about that. Anyway, we were talking last time a little bit about the personalization of marketing, but we're still seeing so many institutions doing things that really make no sense when it comes to marketing. Let's start there. Does that make sense?
It does. As you said, the summer's a great time to step back and take stock. And so I've been thinking about kind of what's new and what's changed in higher ed and what are we seeing in terms of new trends and new tactics. And what I'm seeing is that there really isn't a lot of new stuff out there. And even though we've been talking about some of these trends for years, most institutions just still have not even begun the work that they really need to do. And I think personalization is a great example of that.
Well, we're seeing a lot of new things with respect to programs and the certificates, stackable badges, et cetera, et cetera. But marketing, as you said, it just doesn't seem like it's changing. And institutions, I've seen stats just recently that pretty much everybody is dropping in enrollment. Demographics is obviously one reason for that. But if you're not doing the things that you need to be doing, marketing, that would lead to a drop in enrollment as well, I would think.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the drop in enrollment is just purely demographics and societal factors. But in order to buck that trend and keep enrollment flat or even grow it a bit requires a new look at marketing tactics. And I think you mentioned personalization, and I think that's a really key one. I think when you look at what most institutions are doing, they're still trying to be all things to all people and casting a really wide net. And that does a couple of things. First of all, it really waters down your marketing message because when you're trying to be all things to all people, you're not really clear about what it is that you offer to students. And also, by definition, then what you don't offer to students. But the smart institutions are saying, we have to stop being all things to all people, and we have to really look at who are the students that we're successfully getting to enroll and then ultimately getting to graduation, helping them get through to graduation. Who are those students? What do they look like? What do they want? And why is it that they're coming to us? And why are they successful? And then doing two things, crafting the marketing messages to attract more of those students. And then also looking at where are those students coming from and then being very targeted in trying to find more of those students. So fishing where the fish are. And so the smart institutions are getting a lot more targeted and therefore a lot more efficient and effective with their marketing efforts.
And they have to be. There's been stats that have come out, and these are not just last week's stats, that 74% of all students are now post-traditional. They're the 24 to 70-year-olds. They're not going back to school for the same reasons that the kids right out of high school are. But at the same time, the majority of students go to a school, and this doesn't matter whether it's online or on the ground. The college that they go to is within 40 miles of where they live.
Right.
Why would you use a shotgun approach?
Well, that's a really, really good point. And it's certainly true of my institution, Aurora University, where for our non-athletes, we have a strong Division III athletic program, but for our non-athletes, over 80% of them come from within about a 30-mile radius, and most of them are commuter students. So we've actually just been having these conversations. I think a lot of schools would look at that and say, how do we attract more students from further away so that we can fill up our dorms? But what we're saying is we're obviously meeting a need of students who want a low price, they want to get through quickly, and they don't want to live on campus. So let's attract more of those students because we're meeting their needs. And if we have to close down dorms, we'll close down dorms. Rather than trying to change who we are and who we're attracting, let's recognize who we are and be the best at that, and then attract more of those students who want this type of experience. And institutions will have to do that to be successful. You just have to be really honest about who you are.
And most institutions really don't know. It's not a matter of being honest. They really just don't know about who they are. You know, we've had the conversation looking at campuses like Berkeley, like MIT, like Carnegie Mellon, and even Cal State San Marcos. They know who they are. They know the student demographic that they cater to, and that's who they target for their marketing. And there was another school. We had a gentleman named Dewey Clark on the program as a podcast, and he is the president of North Carolina Wesleyan. When he took over 5 years ago, they were doing a shotgun, scattergun approach to their marketing up and down the East Coast. They narrowed that focus, and in 5 years, they have doubled their enrollment. It works.
And it hasn't cost them more. It's probably cost them less because they're not creating as many materials. They're not buying as many names. So it's probably a win on that front as well.
Absolutely. The other thing which is really interesting is higher ed becomes very homogenous isn't the right word. It becomes very isolated with the ivory towers. And bringing in someone such as yourself who has a broad background in marketing, not only higher ed, but outside as well, I don't think, frankly, there are that many really good people in higher ed who understand marketing.
Well, I think marketing people in higher ed get a bad rap because many of them have grown up in higher ed marketing and don't have other experience. I don't think that it's a failure of marketing as much as it is a failure of the whole institution being committed to identifying who are our students, why do they come here, and why are they successful. And I talk to marketing people in other higher ed institutions who say, we don't have money to do a lot of market research, so it's hard to answer those questions about who are we. And my response is, you don't have to spend any money on market research if you don't want to, because you have students on your campus who would be very willing to come and talk to you if you buy them a pizza. So I guess you have to spend money on pizza, but they're very willing to come and talk to you. And if you talk to them and ask them questions about why did you come here? How did you learn about us? What's been your experience here? What do you like? What do you not like? You get so much valuable information. And then you can do the same thing with your faculty, with your staff, with your alumni. And that's really I mean, yeah, it's nice to be able to do big market research studies, and I don't mean to suggest that that's not also valuable. But my point is, you don't have to do that to be able to get an understanding of who you are, why students choose you, and then starting to craft your messaging around those things and really differentiating yourself from the rest of your competitors and other institutions.
Well, that makes perfect sense to those of us who understand marketing, but then you have to have the convince people to do that positioning and that differentiate, which is part of a good planning process. But when I look out there, there aren't a lot of schools who do good planning processes that include the positioning and the differentiation.
There really aren't. Again, I would come back to that informal market research that I talked about, because there's nothing that persuades people like those anecdotes, like hearing directly from students. So if you videotape those sessions and then you show people snippets of those conversations, that's how they really start to understand, oh, this is why students are coming here. But then if you look at our marketing materials, there's a disconnect between what we're saying to people and why people choose us. So I really can't recommend that sort of informal research highly enough, because it's really persuasive in helping the senior leadership understand the value of this kind of positioning work.
And it's so critical to really understand what it is you excel at and where you need to position yourself within those markets. Interesting stat that I recently saw is the number of MBA programs is actually decreasing, which
I read that.
I'm kind of going, Yahoo! There was way too many out there in the first place, but at the same time, bringing in elements of MBA programs into other disciplines. For example, dentistry is one of those things that people graduate from dental school, they have no concept about how to run a business or a dental practice. Doctors, the same way, many professionals, lawyers. And so bringing elements of business courses into those type of programs. And you can do that in undergraduate as well. So people, when they come out and they have a quote profession, they understand a little bit about the business of how to run a business in their profession.
Exactly. I think that's a great idea. I think there's still a role for the MBA, but the traditional full-time MBA program, 2-year, where you're trying to attract people who've been working for, say, 2 to 4 years, and you convince them to quit their jobs and give up their salary to come back full time. That's what's not working anymore, right? So what we've done at AU is we've developed a +1 program for students who've just graduated. So it's stay on for 1 more full year and get an MBA on top of your undergraduate degree to become more marketable in your first job. And as part of that +1 program, and we also have a master's in public administration that's the same type of program, you have at least one internship that's guaranteed as part of that program. So it makes you more marketable when you're first entering the job market. It's not that the MBA is not still a valuable degree. It's just that you have to look at today's market for students or markets, I guess, because there are multiple markets for an MBA, and say, what do these people want and how can we deliver it in a way that's going to be attractive to them?
One of the things that is kind of exciting for me is starting to see these stackable credentials that are coming on, that you can go back and take 3 or 4 courses and they will all contribute to your MBA or whatever your graduate degree is. I think this makes a lot of sense. There's another thing that's out there, and that from me seems to be a really smart way to market, is if you can market credentials to businesses and get businesses to pay for their people to come back. Have you had experience doing those kind of things?
It's a challenge because with accreditation requirements being what they are and the systems that are in place to support that accreditation, it really limits the flexibility of most traditional institutions in creating those sorts of mini courses, right? So it's like our systems are set up to offer 15-week courses. And it's something that I think as an industry, we really need to look at and say, how do we break that with the systems that we have? So looking to institutions that have successfully done it, like Southern New Hampshire University, and saying, what do we need to do to become more nimble and flexible? You're seeing it with a lot of the online providers.
And I think you're going to start seeing it with some of the more traditionals. The negotiated rulemaking, which just finished up in April in Washington, was about accreditation and innovation. And I think some of the things that we're going to see come out of that are going to be significantly different than what we've had from a traditional accreditation perspective. And it's going to allow that kind of experimentation.
Yeah, that's great news. That would be a real game changer for the higher ed industry.
What I'm seeing is three new markets for higher ed, or I shouldn't say new markets, I should say three markets, three directions. One is your traditional students, which we all know that demographic is decreasing and is going to continue to decrease for a number of years. You've got your post-traditionals, and again, the reasons that they come back to school is very different than those who coming right out of high school. The last one is something that ASU is doing, Southern New Hampshire and others, is targeting businesses to provide direct education. ASU is doing this as a for-profit entity versus a nonprofit, and they're not doing it. I don't know if this is going to be accredited. My sense is it probably is not accredited, but I see that as a large market for higher ed institutions. And if they're able to do this, it really helps balance their revenue streams.
And it also helps to train people for some of those jobs that we know there's more demand for the jobs than there are students with the qualifications, thinking particularly of coding and cybersecurity and fields where you don't necessarily have to have a full degree, but you need very specific coursework to be able to do it. So to me, it's really an obvious solution because it helps people get jobs, and it also helps employers fill the jobs that they have to do the work that they need to do.
And that's so critical for what's going on and for institutions to be able to improve their revenue streams. Whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit, you still have to make a profit to make ends meet.
Right. No money, no mission.
Yeah, there you go. Another one that I participated in myself and really like is what Cal State San Marcos is doing as far as getting their seniors. They have something they call senior experience, where the seniors work in teams, which is something that's very different now. Most institutions are not promoting the kind of teamwork that's needed in business. But they're doing a project for a local business or nonprofit that gives them direct experience in what their major is. I've not heard of other schools doing something like this. And I mean, this is a semester-long project. It is required for graduation in the business college, and it is a credit course. It's required. Have you heard of anybody else doing something like this?
I have not, but I do think that it's greatly needed. When in my last job, we did market research with employers who were hiring new graduates, not only from our institution, but from other institutions as well. And there were two areas that they talked about that we were asking them, what do you need from new graduates or new hires? What skills do they need to have that they're not coming in with or they're not learning in school? And one was teamwork. And there's a difference between doing teamwork for a school project, so having a team write a paper and give a presentation, and teaming with people to do actual work. So that was one thing. The other thing was they were talking about how so many students, and this is going to sound like bashing millennials, and I don't mean to, but students come out without an appreciation that there's a path for things, that a project has a beginning, the messy middle, and the end, right? And it's a lot of slogging through and hard work and working with other people to get it done. You don't start at the end. You don't start with the final screenplay and say, we're ready to shoot. There's a lot of work that goes into it up to that point. And you learn that when you work with other people on a team to get a project done. So I know from creating programs like that, but from talking to employers, that is greatly needed. And institutions that can start to do that on a large scale for their students, I think will really have something that they can go out and talk about to employers and also to prospective students and parents about how their curriculum, their program will help students get a job when they come out.
And even though this is really a programmatic change, there are huge marketing implications for it.
There are. It really allows you to start talking about those things that differentiate you from other institutions. It allows you to talk about real student success. So every institution talks about student success, but to really be able to go out and say, not only here are outcomes, here are our numbers, but here are all the things, the programs that we have in place to help our students be successful when they come out, which makes the degree worth it, which makes the money that you spend worth it. Because as we know, there's a lot of questioning in our society about the value of a college degree. So it has huge implications for marketing.
And one of the other things that we've chatted about is the personalization aspect. Before we started our conversation today, we were chatting about some of the parents that you know are just getting oodles and oodles of information, and they're asking themselves, why are schools spending so much money sending things that are completely useless to us?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've received or I've had a child who's receiving a mountain of information, but I have a son who will be a sophomore next year, so I'm bracing myself for the onslaught. But it's good learning for me as a marketing person to see what other schools are doing. I just hear from so many of my friends who have kids going through the process, just scratching their heads saying, we have boxes and boxes full of catalogs and brochures from schools that we've never heard of and are in places that we would never go to, or the type of school that my child would never go to. So there's still a tremendous amount of waste out there in terms of let's just blanket areas rather than, again, getting back to what I was talking about earlier, just really identifying who is the type of student that would be attracted to our school, would be successful at our school, and how can I find more of those students? And there are ways to do that. There are ways to do it through College Board and ACT that can help you identify where your students are coming from and help you reach more of those types of students. There are resources available to help institutional marketers do that, but so many of them are still not doing it.
Well, one of the things that I continually hear from colleagues who are in marketing is them saying, if we had more dollars, then we'd be able to do a better job of marketing.
Yeah.
And what I tell presidents is, how are you using? It's not a matter of how much you have, it's how you're using that money. Why can't you take money from your enrollment folks and use that to do marketing research so that you can do better targeted marketing? There's one institution. We just recently had Susan Aldridge who's the president of Drexel University Online, and she has blown away the numbers for retention, enrollment, graduation, because they have done personalization. Now, they've invested a lot of money into IT systems. They've invested a lot of money into training, but they know who their student is. And with that, they also know that it's not a question of money from the student's perspective. It's there because Drexel is not the low price, the low cost provider. They're very costly. They bring in the right students because they've done their research, they've done their marketing, they've done their personalization, and they know who their student is supposed to be.
Yeah. What I tell people is, my colleagues at other institutions, is you're not going to get more money. The days of getting more money are over. So you have to say, not only what do we want to do differently, but what can we stop doing? And I guarantee there are things in my institution that we're doing that we could stop doing without harming the enrollment numbers and actually being more effective and getting more students by doing better marketing tactics. So really taking a hard look at what are we doing that we can stop doing, and so that we can free up some dollars to try some of these new things, pilot some new programs. The reason that institutions keep doing the same things that they've always done is because of fear, because they know what they can get. They know the number of students that they can get by doing the same things that they've always been doing. And so it's fear of losing that enrollment. But unfortunately, we're now in a position where if you keep doing those things, you're going to see your enrollment declining because of demographics. So institutions have to start saying, what are we going to stop doing to free up dollars to do some new innovative things that will be more effective?
And that seems like a pretty good place to wrap. So if you had 3 things you were going to tell university presidents about how to better market, what would they be?
Well, I would say do some market research, do some informal market research, talk to your students, talk to your recent graduates, talk to your faculty and staff, and get a solid understanding of who you are. Then, building on that, craft your marketing messages to reach more of those students who want what you're really offering. And recognize that by doing that, you're not going to attract everybody, but you're going to be more successful because you'll be attracting more of the right students. And then the third thing is give your marketing departments the freedom to stop doing some things that you don't know that probably aren't working as well as they used to, and free up some dollars to pilot some new and innovative programs that allow you to start to personalize and really target the right students.
Great. Well, Deb, thanks so much. This is always a pleasure having you on the show. We'll have to do this again in a few months, and after you've gone back to school and you've seen that new class come in.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for listening this week, and a special thank you to this week's special guest, Deb Maue, VP of Marketing for Aurora University. Thanks for being on the show, Deb. Always a pleasure. Our next guest is Dr. Karen Haynes, President of Cal State San Marcos. Dr. Haynes joined us to talk about what she's done at Cal State San Marcos to drive enrollment of first-generation students for her institution. It's a great show, and you won't want to miss this one. If you like this podcast, please take a minute to subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on the Apple Podcast app, would you please take a moment to give us a rating and review? You can find out more information and show notes at changinghighered.com. And if you have guests and/or other topics you'd like to hear about, please email us at podcast@changinghighered.com to let us know. Remember, creating sustainable higher ed institutions requires 3 things: taking a holistic view of your institution, aligning strategies, structures, and processes, and ensuring stakeholders are attuned to where you're going. Without any of those 3 things, you won't get your institution where you want it to go. Until next time.